Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Regulatory Voices. Regulatory Voices is a community that is dedicated to sharing insights and career journeys for people across regulatory affairs in the pharma and biotech space. Today, I'm joined by Mark Charest. Mark, thank you very much for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Connor. Yeah, I'm excited.
Perfect. Before we get into everything and go into today's topics, it'd be great if you could tell the community a bit of a high-level overview of your background and career and where you are at the moment.
Yeah, no problem. So I've spent about 25 years now in regulatory across pharma and biotech. And a lot of my work has been centered on complex or novel programs where the regulatory path it hasn't been straightforward. I've been interested in taking innovative science and translating that into a development strategy that actually works in the real world. Most
Mhm.
recently, I was a vice president leading strategy across multiple programs and working closely with leadership on regulatory decisions. What I enjoy most is helping teams navigate through the uncertainty and move programs through a clear, practical way. I'm
Mhm.
now working towards finding my next role and I'm actually getting pretty close.
Good. And I think obviously it's good to get an idea of where you are now, but I think it's good to look at the beginning as well. So,
Yeah.
for your career in particular, did you start your career trying to get into regulatory? Did you have an idea of what it was, or did you fall into it like most other people?
Yeah, I definitely did not start in regulatory. I started like many of my colleagues in the lab. And my first job was at a company called Millennium Pharmaceuticals in Cambridge, Mass. And I
Mhm.
was part of the DNA sequencing group. So back in thousands in the late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of companies were trying to sequence the genome, use that data and actually create drug targets around the genome. And a better way to
Mhm.
understand disease is to understand the genome. So I was part of a QA QC group that helped to improve the processes for the DNA sequencers. My
Mhm.
role was actually to help write SOPs and to improve the process for the sequencers. That eventually brought me to QA documentation. In QA, I helped to support the launch of Velcade, which was Millennium's first drug. After a few years in QA, I moved into drug safety and I helped that department write SOPs and actually trained to become a drug safety associate and work on the drug safety
Mhm.
cases for Millennium's products, including Velcade. So in QA, actually, no. So from there, that's where drug safety is where I found the intersection of regulatory and other parts of the company. Regulatory helped the drug safety group submit their AE reports. I got to
Mhm.
know the regulatory people pretty well, and I thought they had a really cool job working really with everybody in the company, from the translational scientists to the ClinOps groups and to the commercial people who were actually helping to get the product out on the market. I found my first regulatory role outside of Millennium at a really small company doing
Mhm.
drug device combination work. And my manager actually came from Millennium, so she recognized my background. She needed some help helping to write the regulatory SOPs for the company, really small new company. So I really leveraged that skill of SOP writing into my first regulatory role. And that's how I learned
Mhm.
regulatory.
See,
So
it's
I didn't
always
fall into
interesting
it
how.
I
Oh,
didn't
go on,
fall
Mark.
into
Sorry.
it, more like leveraged what I had into my first regulatory role.
Well, I was going to say it's a lot of people have a fairly similar story of they win something else from the lab and they interacted and they thought, well, that's quite cool. I'd like to know more
Yeah.
about that. And then the conditions were right to have that transition. So it's a great story. And as much as it's similar from quite person to person, it's all unique to each person. The type of company, type of people you interact with, or that experience that highlighted it. And one thing that's always stood out to me from our conversations and getting to know you was the breadth of experience over your not just 20 years in regulatory, but your 25 years across, development stage biotech, commercial organizations, and now some of the contracting things that you've been doing as well. You've seen successful programs, failed trials, restructures, and everything between. And what came through strongly is that regulatory careers in the industry itself don't really follow a predictable path. My first question to you is, looking back across your career, what do you think people misunderstood most about building a career in regulatory?
When we start out, we think the programs that we're working on are really going to change the world, and some
Hmm.
of them do. And I was really lucky that at my first role in biotech was at Millennium, and actually saw a drug approval in my first
Hmm.
job. I think that's pretty rare. Um, the reality, though, is that only 1 in 10 drug development programs in the clinic are actually going to reach approval. That's where regulatory strategy becomes really critical. With those odds against you, success isn't just about science. It's about making the right development decisions early, aligning with health authorities, and helping
Hmm.
teams avoid costly missteps that can derail a program down the line. The other thing that people need to understand, and that I understood, is that it's not every company's goal to cure cancer. I started off at my first job working on cold sores and toenail fungus. And those are really important diseases
Hmm.
for people that have them. They're affected patients.
Hmm.
But what
Okay.
really matters is getting a product out there and working on that strategy
Hmm.
to make sure that it can reach the real world.
And something you mentioned when we talked about your career and what you're looking for from each company is you told me that you've actually never really left a company by choice. It's often been driven by things like funding, trial outcomes, or restructuring. How does that shape the way you think about career stability in this industry?
Yeah, programs are going to fail, but you can still learn a lot through failure. As I moved on in
Hmm.
my career, that failure can be celebrated. When I got to a company called Ironwood, when a program failed, we often had drug funerals for these programs because they had reached the end of their cycle. They didn't have
Yeah.
results that support approval. And the sooner you can figure that out, the less you're going to spend in R&D. So
Mm.
you actually you can save money when programs come to an end because you're not trying to get something that really isn't going to work onto the market. So
Yeah.
failure can definitely.
I think what you said earlier is a good point about when you're starting out, you feel like your product is the one that you really want it to work.
Yeah.
And you said there, you get so attached to it. You said you held a drug funeral. You like, you're sad to see it go. All that time and effort goes into it. And so my follow up to everything you said there is what did those moments, those failed studies, the company shutdowns and restructures teach you about how the industry actually operates?
Yeah, especially in field studies, you can learn a lot by figuring out why the trial failed. Was it something about the design that wasn't
Hmm.
right? Was it the wrong patient population? You can learn if you can learn anything from a failed study, take that with you. Use that knowledge in your next program. It's important to be able to reflect on, what happened, why a company closed their doors, for instance. Was it funding? Is it something that where did things go wrong? And then you can learn from that failure, take it with you, and make sure it doesn't happen again.
So, following that, then, do you think that's something people early in their careers are prepared for, or is it something you only really learn by going through it?
No, I don't think anyone's prepared for their programs to fail, for people to lose their jobs after a failed program or when a company shuts down. Once you go through it and you learn from it and you learn from failure, you'll get the sense and you'll realize when it might happen again. You can either try and find a new position before a layoff happens. If you're lucky, you might be able to transition onto another program at the company. Either way, you make sure that you reflect on the circumstances of why the program failed or why the company failed. And one thing that I just wanted to reflect on, you learn whatever you can. And it's also important to commit yourself to the end, no matter what the outcome is. Your resume is going to look better. You're going to get empathy if you're coming from a layoff or
Mhm.
restructuring at a new position, and you'll start again at another company soon.
As someone who's worked across both development stage companies and commercial organizations, the way that they develop drugs and the cultures can be very different.
Yeah.
How different do those environments feel from a regulatory perspective, as opposed to just a scale perspective?
Yeah, there's definitely different opportunities when you move from development into, you know, a stable commercial organization. In development, it's about gathering the data to support approval. But once a drug is approved, There might still be some development work. Maybe the company is looking at life cycle work. They're trying to expand indications. So they're going to go back into the clinic with a new set of studies and basically support the drug in a
Mhm.
new patient population, probably a similar disease area, but it's going to be a new study and you're going to be getting a new approval for that product. And you're basically going to expand the way that the drug can be used. But the company's going to feel a lot different, especially with commercial stability. And there's a lot of new people to learn from too. We start working with marketing and commercial people. Those are the people that help support the sales of the drug. A couple of the development companies that I worked at that actually became commercial successes, they like getting development and the commercial people together to learn from each other. And it's fascinating once you start talking to the sales reps who actually hit the road every day and promote the drug, get out there and work with the physicians to help educate on the product, inform what are the most important things to know about this new product.
And in your most recent role, you were working on a marketed product, the lifecycle management, labeling strategy.
Right.
How did that change your mindset compared to a lot of the earlier development work that you were doing before?
Yeah, I was really lucky to lead at promo at a commercial stage company. It really gave me a full circle moment. The labeling of a drug, the actual prescribing information that you've worked on for, 8 to 10 years developing in a PI, you see it being used for drug advertising claims. And it's really, truly amazing.
Mhm.
You can only promote on the data that's in your label. So it's really important to design your clinical studies with those in mind, those claims, those primary endpoints that are basically going to become the claims that are going to support a drug once it's commercial. You don't get a second chance to perform new studies. And it's really unlikely that you're going to take a commercial product back into the clinic unless it's for life cycle management and a new indication.
And after 25 years being in industry, 20 in regulatory, what
Mhm.
do you think actually makes someone effective in regulatory long term? Is it technical knowledge, experience, judgment, or something else, or a combination of all of it?
Well, I think early on, technical knowledge is in your career. It gives you the foundation, the science that you worked on in school. But over time, it's really what makes someone effective in regulatory affairs is judgment. A lot of regulatory strategy is working in gray areas where
Hmm.
there isn't a perfect answer and there's not a clear precedent. The ability to evaluate risk, understand science, anticipate how the health authorities are going to think about an issue, and guide teams toward practical decisions becomes really
Hmm.
incredibly important. The other piece is communication, where regulatory sits at the intersection of science, medicine, business, and policy. So being able to translate complex issues in a way that can align teams and move products forward is a huge part of long term effectiveness. Over time, I've come to see regulatory as less of a gatekeeping function and more as a strategic decision making function that helps organizations navigate uncertainty and move therapies, innovative therapies forward responsibly.
Um, I want to kind of take a little bit of a pivot into looking
Sure.
at some of the interesting moments in your career.
Yeah.
And something we spoke about in our last few conversations was some of the high stakes FDA meetings you've been in. And
Yeah.
I think it'd be a really good story to hear some of them. You mentioned there's been
Sure.
like 20 over your career that really stick out to you. Um, so my question would be, as someone who's been through those FDA meetings and you know what it's like, what stood out was how different the reality is compared to how people imagine them, especially for those who've never been in the room. So the first question is for someone who's never experienced it or someone who's just
Right.
entering, what actually happens in a high stakes FDA meeting?
Yeah. I've met with FDA at really every stage from pre-IND to post-commercial interactions, from type A meetings to type D meetings. The reality is that you're walking into a room filled with just people. When you're at FDA, you realize that Well, this is just their normal workplace. You notice there's a farmer's market every Tuesday here. Oh, and there's Dr. So and so waiting for the shuttle. So when it comes down to it, you're really just there to meet with normal people. They have a very important job to protect the public, but you're really just working with normal people. I'd say the best thing that you can do during FDA meetings is to explain and help clarify in as little as time possible. Everything takes time during an FDA meeting, right? Presentations take time away from discussions, and discussions are where you're actually going to get your questions answered. So the sooner you get clarity, the better. If you have time to spare, don't use it. Leave it. Summarize the agreements, the main points, any commitments that you're making to the FDA, and end the meeting as soon as you can, and hopefully with your path laid out.
And a follow up to that would be, what is the role of the regulatory lead in that setting? Because it's not just you in that meeting with other people in front of you at the FDA. There's other people there as well who've got things to say. But as the regulatory lead, what is your role in that setting?
Your job isn't to be an expert. You're not,
Mhm.
you don't know all the data. Your job is to direct the discussion to your experts. And they've worked on the crafted discussion. They're going to help answer FDA's questions. And they can also ask the FDA their questions, the company's questions. Your
Mhm.
role is to anticipate the discussion and step in if needed to redirect or to potentially ask a question if it wasn't brought up by your experts. So you're always thinking ahead and thinking about the discussion and planning to get your questions answered. As the lead reg person, you need to be clear about roles too. So everybody wants to come to an FDA meeting, but your participants who are there just to observe need to know that there are only a few limited speaking roles at FDA, and only your most seasoned and trusted experts are allowed to speak. Everyone attending needs to have clear roles and responsibilities, and it's the regulatory lead job to set that out for the.
Okay. That's a good point. I think it's something
Yeah.
good to illustrate, because sometimes you read these letters of, who were in attendance, and you see like 30 people and you think, wow, that's a cramped room. And then you mention there's people who are just attending as well. So it's good to kind of imagine what that room looks like and kind of your role in it as deciding who's going to be here, who's relevant. And
And just to
if
go
I look
back to
at,
the actual meeting, so what's going to
go on.
happen is you and your team are going to show up at FDA.
Mhm.
You're going to meet the project manager that you've emailed with about 100 times. They're going to help you get through security, and then they'll take you into the room and they'll show you which side of the table is yours. And it's important as the regulatory lead to
Mhm.
have some organization of with your experts. So you want to sit close to them so that you can quietly communicate during the meeting. Then FDA will come in and they'll take their side of the table. The project manager is going to open up the meeting. Introductions are going to be very, very brief. And then they'll turn the meeting over to you and your experts. It's showtime.
And how much responsibility actually sits with yourself as the reg leader in terms of the outcome of the meeting?
Yeah, you don't get a lot of chances to meet with FDA. It can take it can take up to 6 months to plan an effective engagement with FDA.
Really?
Aligning your experts, writing your questions, writing the briefing document, getting everything submitted, and then rehearsing. So working on the
Mhm.
actual meeting prep. You've got to anticipate the questions that FDA might come back with. So it takes a lot of time and you don't get a lot of chances to do it. So it's crucial that you get the company's questions answered. And as the lead regulatory person, it's your job to make sure that you come away with a clear path. You're
Mhm.
not going to always like the answers that you're going to get, but at least you have a way to plan contingencies because now you have an answer. So without
Mhm.
an answer, there's no way to move a path forward.
Okay. If you're okay to, you told me a story
Yeah,
about
sure.
one of the FDA interactions you had. I think it was a really good one, and it was where you told me the FDA thought that there was some biases in your data and for your phase 3 program. Can you actually walk us through what happened in that meeting? Because I feel like that must be a very like a step back moment of, oh my god, what are you accusing us of here?
Yeah. That was an FDA meeting. That was the unfortunate end of a program that
Hmm.
myself and the company had worked on for over 5 years. We believed we had solid phase 3 data, but the FDA thought that the sponsor had too much involvement in training the blinded study investigators in this blinded imaging trial.
Right.
So much that they thought the investigators would want to do a good job for the company and basically get this product approved by calling the images for the sponsor. They thought that we had tipped the investigators off too
Right.
much. FDA cautioned that there's no real way to use this phase 3 data. And instead, they insisted on a new trial. But the whole point of that meeting was to try and plan for an advisory committee. That was the reason we were meeting with FDA. They were going to use the AdCom to publicly prove that the sponsor had biased their data. But there's no real walking back from bias once FDA claims that your study is biased. So the sponsor chose to withdraw the NDA instead of moving forward with the advisory committee. We also weren't planning on working on a new phase 3 study. So development of that program actually ended when we left Maryland.
I can't imagine what was going through your mind going into that discussion, knowing what was at stake, and then being presented with that decision and obviously that point of we think that's bias here. What was that like in the moment? Your mind must have been going everywhere.
Yeah. Having gone through a couple failed programs up to that point in my career, I knew the program was done. It was actually the end of drug development for that company too. They pivoted into manufacturing bioprocess materials that biologics companies use to create their products. It actually became a world leader. So that company ended up doing really well. But that program definitely came to an end.
And so obviously hearing that story,
Yeah.
as someone who's obviously external to what regulatory do and these companies, but obviously he's invested in the stories. My brain goes to what actually moves the needle really? Is it the data itself, or is it how the argument is presented, or is it a balance of both? Because it sounds like that there was a lot of passion to get this product through by the investigators because they felt like there was something there.
Yeah.
And so my brain goes to, well, was the product good? It must have been if they were that excited that it kind of came across there was biases.
Yeah. In that situation, there really isn't any way to move forward with FDA's bias claim. It invalidated the data basically by saying that the study was biased. So we had gathered our own experts to try and save the study, to try and save the data, but there wasn't a solid way to move the needle back from bias, no matter how credible the experts were.
And so how do you manage that balance between defending your position and maintaining credibility with the agency? Because obviously it's a relationship you build. You have your project manager, you get to know them. To get to phase 3 is a long journey. So you're at that point, I imagine you're trying to save a bit of face as well, but also trying to defend your actions because you don't feel you've done anything wrong, whereas there is this accusation of bias. So how do you maintain that credibility?
Yeah, relationship building, as you point out, Connor, is so important with FDA. You're working with these people, potentially up to 10 years. For that situation, for that company, we chose the higher road of maintaining credibility and basically giving up the argument. We didn't want to tarnish our experts who, we had sought out to help support us and the company. And we had already decided to withdraw the NDA during that meeting to avoid the AdCom and to avoid any mention of bias from that company.
So I suppose there are a lot of lessons learned there.
Yeah.
In your advice to people who are going through the journey of doing those meetings for the first time, what are the biggest mistakes you see people make going into FDA meetings, and what separates the teams that get what they want from those who don't?
Yeah, sometimes the company wants to do a really good job presenting to the FDA, but it's a mistake to use too many slide decks. They often get in the way during the meetings. Companies want to show FDA all the data, but they've already reviewed it, so you don't need to rehash that. The best strategy is to use as little slides as possible and to only use them as a backup. The outcome of these meetings actually happens before the meeting actually starts. So the outcome is already been decided. So the best thing that you can do as the regulatory lead with your team is to take the preliminary comments that FDA is going to send ahead of time, respond to those comments actually as quickly as you can, and get anything clarified that you need to that may have confused the agency. The best thing you can do is put them into that actual preliminary comment document, so they see the flow. They see that you've responded and you're providing
Mm.
clarity that's going to help drive the meeting. I'll regroup with my experts 5 minutes after those preliminary comments come through to try and answer anything that we can quickly. FDA is going to say that anything that you send after submitting the briefing document isn't going to be reviewed. But I found that clarifying confusion before the meeting really helps to move things sometimes more than the meeting itself. They've thanked my team. FDA has thanked our team on many occasions for getting responses in early before the meeting. So don't wait. Respond as soon as you can. Get your answers into that preliminary comment document. And many times those responses are going to actually make their way into those final FDA minutes. So spend less time presenting, more time discussion, and clarify anything you can before the meeting.
Yeah. When you were telling that story, I kind of go back to some of my dad's favorite sayings. He's done a lot of like project management things, and one of the ones he says is, "There's no power in PowerPoint. Don't bombard people with slides.
Yeah.
Present, talk, discuss." And the other one he said about being prepared and having these questions and responses done before was one that he always says is. Failure to prepare is preparing to fail, and I felt those two kind of really succinctly tell what you're trying to say there, and it's good. It just shows you how some advice really does just cross industries no matter what. Because we've all done it. We've all been in a room where someone's playing 30 slides, and it's like, you're losing me. You got to talk about it.
Absolutely.
That's all. We're people. We talk to each other. We engage with each other. And so, yeah, I think it's a great bit of advice. Don't bombard people with slides because it does go over after a while.
Yeah. No, it's really important.
I wanted to take a little bit of a look into the journey you've had as someone who's done a good stint at every company he's been at, and you've progressed naturally into each role. I wanted to discuss how the role of regulatory changes as you move through the levels from manager to director to VP. And what stood out to me in the discussion I've had with people, it's not just that how the job becomes different, not just responsibility, but in how you think and operate day to day. So the first question on that point would be, at which point in your career did you realize that the job had shifted from execution to leadership?
Yeah. As you move up, you find that you have less time to focus on creating the content yourself. You're relying on your direct reports to execute because you need to execute in other areas for the company and, for leadership. So while your managers are working on drafting, you're setting up meetings with your experts to help support your justifications. It's your job to help justify the company's position and provide objectives for your team to execute on. As a good leader, you're trying to open doors and remove roadblocks for your managers so they can get the resources they needed to meet with the right people and to get the knowledge to complete their tasks.
Mhm.
You're inviting your team to the table to speak with the experts, to get their point of view and incorporate it into the company's justifications. It turns out, after the fact, that a lot of the experts that I'm talking about, the people that you're meeting with, they're actually the ex division directors that are now your
Mhm.
trusted consultants that you met with while they were at FDA, but now they're on your side as your consultants.
Mhm.
I find that it's really important for regulatory managers to have that interaction to meet with the people that have done this before, the previous division directors, the experts who are out there. In some
And
way, you're preparing others to shine while you're taking the back seat. When your managers
mhm.
become directors, you let them take responsibility during the FDA meetings when they're ready. So we all need to start somewhere. So I was fortunate to have leaders to let me do just that. Now I
Mhm.
want to offer the same to my teams.
Something that I wanted to ask about is I talked before about preparing for the next stage, and
Yeah.
can you be prepared for these things? When you go from execution to leadership in general, is that something you're aware is going to happen? Like, do you get told that, or do you kind of just learn the job that, okay, this feels different, I need to have a different approach here? Like, are you conscious of it, or is it again, it's another bit of a baptism by fire at that point?
Yeah, I was fortunate to come up under great leaders who basically prepared me. I think we talked about an analogy like you become this great magician and you show your apprentice the secrets to your most famous tricks, so that now it's their time to perform. You're prepared for it by watching great leaders, and you're going to get that when you stay at a company long enough. So it's important to experience that leadership, learn from it, so you can take it and prepare for it when it's your shot.
It's learning by osmosis.
Yeah,
When you're close to people and you're watching them, analyzing them, and obviously being curious enough to ask them questions on why they do this and why they do that, I
yeah.
think that's always a good thing to have. In my opinion, your leader that you're reporting into or you're trying to learn from, it's always asking questions, just listening and taking it all on board and applying at certain points and seeing how it goes and saying, how would you have done it? Because a lot of it is, putting yourself out there and trying to apply and see what the result is and try to learn from it. And you mentioned a little bit there about the jump from manager to director is there's a lot of execution there. And then a director, you said that you start to give them, a voice in these meetings with the FDA. You start to give them that platform. Would you say that is the main difference between the two? At manager, there's a lot more execution but focused work, whereas director, there's more strategy, more creativity, and more interaction with the agency. Or is there more to that difference between the two roles?
Yeah, as a manager, you have tasks to complete. You have writing tasks, you have research tasks that, you're going to get from your director and you're going to get from leadership. When you're a director, you're taking all those completed tasks and you're putting them together to complete the dossier to support your reg strategy. And I'll go one step further, right? So as the reg leader, the head of regulatory, the VP, you take that dossier and you make sure that that strategy meets and aligns with your company's corporate goals. It becomes a
Hmm.
big deal when your regulatory department strategy supports or exceeds your company's goals. So you start out with tasks. Those tasks become the bigger picture of completing a dossier, and eventually those dossiers support corporate goals, which is the whole leadership view.
Yeah, I suppose that's one key aspect of the transition from director to VP. Are there any other big shifts in that jump? Because obviously, from my side in recruitment, that's where you start to see this filter of people who can't make that jump and those who do. That seems to be a real big natural filter at that point. So, what is the biggest shift between that jump?
Yeah, it's comfort level, really. It's being able to take all the pieces and say, we have everything we need to support this
Hmm.
strategy. We have a scientific justification that we can move forward with and have a reason to believe. It takes time and judgment to realize that you have all the pieces that you need to support a regulatory path. So it definitely takes time.
You told me before that as a VP, sometimes your role isn't necessarily just to do the work, but it's more to enable others, connect people, and make sure everything's coming together. Which obviously
Yeah.
that's the big cross-functional piece, not just in the regs group, but all the other groups you're working with. How hard is that shift for people to go into that? And you've got to enable now, as opposed to just we've got this to do, let's do this. Because that's something that when I became manager, I had to wrap my head around a little bit. It was do a lot of work yourself. You're executing. You're trying to be strategic and creative, etc. But then when you go actually have people and you're responsible for a group, you have to give them a platform to succeed and enable them to do it. And that was kind of a big learning curve for me. That's first 6 months.
Yeah, it's when you're in leadership and regulatory, you now see how your department plays such a huge role in a company's commercial
Mhm.
success. Your team's executing on a regulatory strategy that's going to support corporate goals. Regulatory isn't it's not a department that brings in revenue, but it is a department that's setting up the company for that to happen. Without sound regulatory strategy, you can't support corporate achievements in drug development. And at the VP level, you're making sure that you're setting up the company's blueprint for commercial success for that product.
And how much of the role of the VP would you say is about foresight and anticipating problems before they happen?
Yeah, sure. Successful leaders that I've been fortunate to come up under have set some really great examples for me. I didn't see them take over the writing of a briefing document. Instead, I saw them clear the deck so that there's time and support in order for the managers to complete the briefing documents. linking up a manager with a medical writer or an expert reviewer sets up the support in the right place. So that's
Hmm.
the goal. That's the role, the goal and the role of a good regulatory leader, to give everybody what they need so that the
Hmm.
whole group, department, and the company can succeed.
And what would your advice be for someone who's currently a director, who's aiming for a VP? What should they start doing differently today?
Yeah, I made my way up by connections. My VP role came from a really strong connection. So keep in touch with your previous colleagues. You'll get a shot if you have some help along the way and you prove that you can execute. You're more likely to get a shot at leadership if someone knows you at the company and they know you can lead and commit yourself to the company's goals. Make them your goals. So make it your goal to complete that end of phase 2 meeting and get your questions answered. Make it your goal to complete that NDA and to get that drug approval. So it's gonna make your career fill out once you commit yourself to a company and to getting the things done in regulatory that the company needs.
Well, unfortunately, Mark, we've quite quickly come to the end of the interview. Um,
Great.
so I'm going to, as usual, finish with some quick fire questions for you. Feel free to say what comes to your mind. Um, which advice do you wish you'd received earlier in your career?
Yeah, spend more time focusing on writing.
Okay. And number two would be, if we had this conversation again in 10 years' time, what do you think would have changed the most in regulatory affairs?
I think the tools are going to get much better, especially with AI, but adoption is still going to depend on trust and how people choose to use it.
And lastly, what part of working in regulatory affairs do you personally enjoy the most?
Gosh, celebrating after a successful FDA meeting with your team is something that, it's incredible. It's an incredible feeling. And I hope that you guys out there find success there too.
Here's to many more. Mark, thank you very much for taking time to join me today. It's been a real pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Connor. Thanks, everyone.
And for anyone who's watching, thank you for tuning in again. If you have any questions on this episode or anything Mark has said, feel free to put something in the comments and engage, or connect and message Mark directly. I'm sure he'll be happy to answer any questions you've got. But thank you for joining me on another episode, and I'll see you on the next one.